I swallowed my tears as my husband's son kicked me out of the will, reading the room where I should have been the heir. 30 years as a wife erased like I never existed. But then, the USB he left behind revealed the truth. I wasn't just betrayed. I was nearly killed. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now so you won't miss the next episode. My name is Grace Whitmore. I'm 62 years old, and I was erased. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way. No one kicked down a door. There wasn't a car chase or some explosive courtroom meltdown. No, I was erased in the most sterile, bureaucratic, soul-crushing way possible by omission. On a Wednesday morning in a downtown Sacramento law office under fluorescent lights and forced pleasantries. It started with a chair, a stiff, oversized leather one that squeaked every time I moved. I sat there clutching my purse like a lifeline. My palms were damp. The lawyer's office was tastefully cold mahogany shelves, glass awards, and oversized painting of the Sierra Nevada behind his desk. Everything smelled like lemon polish and paperwork. To my left sat Eric, my husband's son. My stepson, though we'd never used the word. The child I helped raise when his mother left. The same boy whose bruised knees I bandaged, whose science fair poster I stayed up helping him glue. But that morning, the man beside me wasn't that boy. He was a man in a $3,000 suit with a Cartier watch peeking beneath a French cuff, a man whose jaw clenched every time I breathed too loudly. He never once looked at me. Across from us sat Mr. Bernard Kent, the family attorney. Polished. White hair combed to military precision. A man who looked like he charged by the breath, not the hour. Mr. Kent cleared his throat. First, I'd like to acknowledge how difficult this time must be. Mr. Whitmore's passing was... Eric didn't wait. She doesn't need to be here, he said flatly. I turned. Excuse me, this isn't for you, he said. This is between me and my father. You don't belong here. My mouth opened, but the words felt slow to catch. I'm his wife, Eric scoffed, by technicality. I looked to Mr. Kent, who avoided my eyes. Surely, I began, this is a misunderstanding. Richard and I... There is no misunderstanding, Eric cut in. There's a will. That's all that matters today. I felt something shift in the air. A slight drop in temperature, maybe. A subtle change in pressure. Or perhaps it was internal, a small collapse in the foundation I'd stood on for the last 3 decades. I have a right to be here, I whispered. Eric leaned back, arms crossed. You had a role. Let's not overstate it. A role. Like I was cast in some B-movie as the loyal assistant, or the second wife who was never really family. Mr. Kent cleared his throat again. Perhaps it would be best if everyone remained present for the reading. There may be... She's not in it, Eric snapped. She's not a beneficiary. Let's not drag this out. I couldn't breathe. There was a folder on the table. Mr. Kent opened it with the kind of hesitation that screamed volumes. He scanned the top page, then looked up at me, then back to Eric. Then he began. He read through the preamble, the standard language, being of sound mind, etc., etc., then the allocations. To my horror, my name never came. Not once. Not for the house in Granite Bay. Not for the summer property in Monterey. Not for the company we had built together piece by piece over 30 years. Not even a painting. Not a watch. Not a letter. Not a mention. The estate was left entirely to Eric Whitmore. It was like I never existed. I sat perfectly still, but my heart was a stampede. My hands folded in my lap, trembled so hard I had to dig my nails into my palm to stop them. A fog moved through my head. My name. It should have been there. I wasn't just his wife, I was his partner, his caregiver, his confidant. I'd spent 3 decades erasing myself so he could shine, and now nothing. Eric sat smug beside me, his silence loud with victory. I turned to Mr. Kent. Is this final? He hesitated. It is. This version of the will was signed and notarized 6 weeks before Mr. Whitmore's passing. 6 weeks, I asked. Yes, ma'am. 6 weeks ago, Richard was barely lucid. I was hand-feeding him broth, reading him the sports section out loud, helping him to the bathroom. He couldn't sign his name straight, let alone draft a new will. I turned to Eric. Did you do this? He smiled faintly, not answering. I nursed your father, I said, my voice rising. I sat beside him for hours while you didn't even return his calls. I came when it mattered. When it mattered to you, maybe. When there was something to gain. He stood up. You're embarrassing yourself. And you've shamed your father's name. He shrugged. He made a choice. He knew who really cared about him. Mr. Kent looked mortified. Mrs. Whitmore, if I may. You may not, I said coldly, rising to my feet. I see what this is. I walked toward the door. My knees were shaking. As I reached for the handle, Eric said just loud enough for me to hear. He only kept you around out of pity. You were never really family. You were just convenient. I paused. Convenient? I remembered selling my parents' home so Richard could fund his second warehouse. I remembered canceling my graduate school offer to manage payroll when the company couldn't afford a CFO. I remembered cooking dinner for Eric every night after his mother disappeared to Arizona with her new husband. Convenient. I didn't turn around. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The click of it closing behind me felt final. I stood there for a long moment, hands gripping my purse strap like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. Through the frosted glass I heard muffled voices. Mr. Kent's stilted professionalism. Eric's voice louder now, maybe triumphant. I sat on one of the waiting room benches. A potted plant sat crooked in the corner. The air was heavy with disinfectant and old wood polish. People passed me, associates, clients, staff, but no one looked twice. No one could see the woman who had just been rewritten out of her own life. I was no longer a widow. I was an outsider. I looked down at my hands. They looked older today. My nails trimmed short and bare. A wedding ring slightly loose now from months of skipped meals and worry. What would I tell people? That Richard had left me nothing, that the man who once called me his home had legally rendered me invisible. I tried to remember the last thing he'd said to me. Something about soup, about how he liked the way I used ginger instead of onions. Had he known? Had he planned this? Or had someone made that decision for him? I didn't know, but I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I was no longer part of the family I had given everything to. And yet, somewhere inside me a whisper pushed through the grief. This isn't over. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I needed the money. Because this wasn't the man I married. Because I knew Richard. And Richard Whitmore may have been many things, ambitious, stubborn, maddening, but he wasn't cruel. Not to me. Not like this. So either he had changed in those final weeks, or someone had changed something for him. I rose slowly. My knees ached. The day had barely begun, but I felt like I'd lived a lifetime in that chair. As I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind me, I looked at my reflection in the metal wall. My eyes were tired, but sharp, still watching, still here. Let them think they've erased me. They don't know what I remember. They don't know what I kept. They don't know what he left behind. But I do, and I was going to find it. People say grief is linear, that it moves in stages, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. But no one ever talks about memory. About how grief drags you backward, not forward. As I sat alone on the park bench across from the law office, my fingers still trembling from what had just unfolded, I didn't feel like a woman in her 60s. I didn't feel like a woman at all. I felt like a girl again. The kind of girl who used to believe in men who made promises, in dreams built from scratch, in loyalty and love, and in the ridiculous notion that if you gave everything of yourself, the world would keep score and reward you in the end. I met Richard Whitmore when I was 31. Back then, he was just Rick. No company, no boardroom suits, no legal team. Just a man with calloused hands and a smile that made you forget to breathe. He was working out of a converted storage unit in West Sacramento, trying to launch a supply chain logistics company. I was a junior accountant at a mid-size firm. We met at a seminar on small business tax strategies, both of us bored out of our minds. He cracked a joke under his breath about the speaker's toupee, and I snorted so loud the couple in front of us turned around. We had coffee afterward, then lunch, then weekends. I liked his ambition, his fire. But more than that, I liked the way he looked at me when I spoke, as if my thoughts mattered, not just my face or my resume. He said I was the only person who made his ideas sound like possibilities, not pipe dreams. Within 6 months, I was helping him with spreadsheets on weekends. By month 8, I was proofing pitch decks for investors. And then came the decision. Grace, he said one night, his voice thick with hope and something dangerously close to desperation. "If I don't get this next round of funding, I'm done. Out. I'll have to go back to driving freight for McAllister's." I remember the silence in that moment and how I broke it. "My parents still own that duplex in Rancho Cordova," I said. "They're looking to sell. I could talk to them." He blinked. "Sell it?" he asked. "To who?" I hesitated. "To me." That's how it began. That's how I sold the only inheritance I had, the home my parents had built with their retirement money to invest in a dream that wasn't even mine. But I believed in Rick. I believed that if we built something together, it would hold. I didn't expect a guarantee. I never asked for one. I just wanted to matter. So I quit my job, walked away from a career I had worked 10 years to build, became his full-time support system, his bookkeeper, scheduler, errand runner, food prepper, and eventually his wife. We married quietly at the county clerk's office. No white dress, no reception, just a signature and a sandwich at a diner afterward. I remember he held my hand the whole meal. That meant more to me than any bouquet or ballroom ever could. Then came the real challenge, building the company. There were long days, longer nights. There were times we couldn't afford heating, times we argued over invoices, times I fell asleep on spreadsheets and woke up to find him covering me with his jacket. We made it work, and slowly it began to pay off. We moved out of the storage unit into a real office, hired staff, landed bigger contracts. Rick grew more confident, more focused. He began introducing me as my partner at client meetings. I was proud of him, of us. But with success came shadows. One of them, with a backpack and a quiet scowl, arrived at our doorstep one Sunday morning. Eric. He was 13. His mother had just remarried and moved to Oregon. Eric didn't want to go. Rick offered to take him in just for the summer. The summer turned into fall, then winter, then indefinitely. Eric was distant, polite sometimes, mostly cold. I made an effort, cooked meals he liked, took him school shopping, tried to help with homework. But there was always a wall, a kind of disdain in his eyes, like I'd stolen something from him just by existing. At first I thought it was adolescent grief, a phase. But as he grew older, the distance became disdain, subtle jabs, passive aggression, silence, then eventually open rejection. One night when he was 16, I found him tearing up a framed photo of the three of us at a company picnic. "You're not my mother," he muttered. "No," I said gently, "but I've tried to be here for you." He looked at me with a sneer I'll never forget. "I didn't ask for you to be here," I told Rick. His response, "He's just angry." Rick, he broke the photo. "He'll come around," but he never did. Rick would always choose quiet over confrontation. He hated conflict. His solution to everything was to let it cool off. He stood between us, but never with me. Not really. Not when it counted. And so I learned to shrink, to make room, to let Eric talk over me at dinner, to clean up after his tantrums, to accept that family in our home was a conditional word, a fragile arrangement. Over the years, Eric came and went. College, a stint overseas, failed relationships, failed startups. But whenever he returned, it was with the same coldness, the same tight-lipped civility that felt more like contempt than respect. Still I remained. For Rick. Because Rick in his quiet way loved me. I believe that. He just didn't know how to protect me from his past. And that in the end became the foundation of my erasure. 1,000 small silences. 1,000 moments where he could have spoken up and didn't. It wasn't just that Eric hated me. It was that Rick let him. That he never set the record straight. Never reminded his son who I was. What I meant. What I'd sacrificed. So when that will was read and my name wasn't on it, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation. That 30 years of loyalty meant nothing if no one was willing to speak it out loud. That love, no matter how deep, can be erased in ink by the ones too weak to defend it. As I sat there remembering it all, I wanted to scream. Not in rage, in sorrow. For the woman I had been. For the girl who had believed so completely that building something with someone meant she would always have a place in it. But I didn't scream. I sat still. Because grief is not loud, not always. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it's the silence that follows the memory of a laugh. The stillness of a house you built but don't own. The emptiness of a name never spoken again. And as the sun began to dip behind the tall glass towers of downtown Sacramento, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I had given up everything for a man who in the end had given me nothing in return, not even his name in a signature that mattered. And still I loved him. Or maybe I loved the version of him I carried inside me. The man in the storage unit. The man with calloused hands and dreams that needed spreadsheets. That version of Richard Whitmore would have never written me out, which meant someone else had, and I was going to find out who. Because the woman I used to be, the accountant, the strategist, the backbone of a rising empire, she wasn't gone. She had just been sleeping, and now she was awake. It started with a cough. Not the dry kind you clear your throat with, not the kind that comes from dusty air or swallowed tea the wrong way. No, this was different. Wet, heavy, like something inside him was loosening. Richard had always been a strong man, stubborn, too proud to rest even when he had a fever. But that morning, he sat at the edge of our bed with his back hunched, coughing so hard I thought his ribs would crack. "I'm fine," he rasped, waving off my hand. "You're not," I said. "We're going to the doctor." He didn't argue. That's how I knew it was serious. The diagnosis came fast. Stage 4 lung cancer. Inoperable. They said months, not years. They said comfort care. They handed us pamphlets filled with kind euphemisms and pretended they weren't offering a countdown. I sat in that sterile beige room, gripping the side of the chair like it was a cliff's edge. Richard just stared ahead, blinking slowly, as if the news hadn't quite reached him yet. Or maybe it had, and he simply chose not to flinch. At home, he refused to let me cry. "We've built harder things than this," he whispered. But I cried anyway, quietly, in the shower, into my pillow, behind the pantry door. And then came Eric. He arrived the next day, unannounced, with bags. I opened the door to find him standing there, all crisp collar and concern. "Heard about Dad," he said simply. "I'll be staying for a while." Something in his voice was too calm, too rehearsed, but I was too tired to argue. At first I was grateful. Having another set of hands helped. Richard needed medication every 6 hours. His appetite vanished. He couldn't sleep more than 2 hours without waking in pain. I kept charts, logged symptoms, memorized the names of pills I could barely pronounce. Eric stepped in surprisingly well, even eagerly. He organized schedules, sat through appointments, offered to take the lead with the doctors. I told myself he was finally showing up, that he'd realized too late maybe how much his father meant to him. But something didn't sit right. He took over too easily, too quickly. He called the shots, told the nurses who could visit and when. He intercepted phone calls, redirected questions, and slowly, subtly, I began to vanish. At the next oncology appointment, the nurse addressed Eric directly, even though I'd been managing Richard's care for weeks. "Your father's vitals are stable today," she said, handing the chart to him. Eric smiled. "Thank you. We're adjusting his nutrition next week." I opened my mouth to speak, but Richard was already being wheeled out for a CT scan, and I stood there holding a purse full of sticky notes and questions no one wanted to hear. At home, the marginalization deepened. Eric set up a digital calendar I wasn't invited to. He changed pharmacy accounts. Even the house began to feel less like mine. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Eric and Dr. Patel, the palliative care specialist, speaking in low voices. "She's overwhelmed," Eric said. "She means well, but she's showing signs of burnout. I think we need to start making executive decisions." I froze behind the hallway corner, bile rising in my throat. "Are you suggesting medical power of attorney transfer?" Dr. Patel asked, voice cautious. Eric paused. "Only if it becomes necessary." Necessary, like I was a liability. That night I confronted him. "Don't go behind my back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Eric shrugged. "You've been forgetting things." "No, I haven't." "Really, you gave Dad the wrong dose of prednisone 2 days ago." My heart dropped. "That's not true. It was logged in his file. I've never made a mistake with his meds." Eric didn't argue. He didn't need to. The damage was already done. I realized then what he was doing. He was building a case, slowly, patiently, like a spider crafting a web. One misplaced bottle, one misremembered appointment, all of it pointing toward a narrative I was unfit. Emotionally unstable, too close, too tired. He was trying to prove I couldn't be trusted. And Richard was too weak to notice. Or worse, too worn down to intervene. One night, maybe 3 weeks into Eric's arrival, I made soup Richard's favorite, the one with lemongrass and ginger. I brought it to the bedroom and found them talking in hushed tones. When I stepped in, they went quiet. "We were just going over the next round of treatments," Eric said, flipping shut a leather binder. Richard nodded, distracted. I tried to speak, but the words died in my throat. They had locked me out. The next morning, Richard's legal team called to schedule a brief meeting. Just some estate adjustments, they said. Adjustments. I wasn't invited. When I asked Richard about it, he mumbled something about trusts and clarity. That was the moment I knew. Something was happening behind my back. Something permanent. That night I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy. Eric was still up pacing the living room, speaking softly into his phone. I crept to the top of the stairs and crouched just out of sight, listening. I know, he said. But once Dad's gone, it's just paperwork. I've already got the notary lined up. The moment the dust settles, we legalize everything. A pause. No, she won't contest it. She has no clue. She's too busy playing nurse. My stomach turned. He knew. He knew I was being edged out. He knew Richard was slipping. And he was planning for a version of the future that didn't include me. That's when I saw it. Not just the greed, but the cruelty. The cold, calculating removal of a person's existence. I went back to bed that night and lay beside my husband, staring at the ceiling. Richard snored softly. He hadn't always been like this. But cancer doesn't just take the body. It steals the will, the sharpness, the ability to fight for what's right. And Eric had seized the moment. The man I loved was disappearing one breath at a time, and the son I tried to raise was ensuring I'd disappear with him. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to rip the binder from Eric's smug hands and throw it out the window. But I knew better. They had power now, and I had nothing. No legal claim, no biological tie, no support system. Just a history no one believed, and a love story no one wanted to remember. So I waited, watched, listened, gathered silence like breadcrumbs, and I promised myself one thing. If I ever found a crack in Eric's plan, just one, I would crawl through it and drag every truth he buried back into the light, even if it destroyed me. It rained the morning Richard died. Not a storm, not thunder and fury, just a quiet, persistent drizzle that soaked everything in a slow, unrelenting hush. The kind of rain that didn't make headlines, the kind of rain that just lingered, like grief. I was standing in our kitchen making tea I didn't intend to drink when the phone rang. I knew before I picked it up. Mrs. Whitmore, the voice on the other end said. Too kind, too rehearsed. I'm so sorry. Mr. Whitmore passed earlier this morning. No warning, no call during the night, no you should come now. Just that past tense, passed. I dropped the kettle, didn't even hear it hit the floor. My ears rang, my body didn't move. How I finally whispered. He passed peacefully, in his sleep. I hung up before the nurse could say another word. I had seen him just yesterday. Sat beside him while he drifted in and out of morphine-laced sleep. Held his hand. Sang an old lullaby from our early years. He smiled at me, faint but real. That smile should have been mine to hold when he left. But it wasn't, because I wasn't there. I threw on the first coat I found, didn't even check if my shoes matched, and drove to the hospital like a woman possessed. The world outside the car windows was gray and wet, stoplights blurred through raindrops. Everything looked far away. I parked illegally, ran past reception, and made it to the ICU doors breathless. Mrs. Whitmore, the nurse at the desk, said, standing too quickly. You can't go in there right now. My husband just died, I snapped. Try and stop me. Her eyes flicked to someone behind me. And that's when I heard him. Grace. Eric. He stepped into view, blocking my path like a wall in a black coat. They're cleaning the room, he said calmly. You'll get your chance. What are you doing here? I asked, blinking at him. I thought you were out of town for a meeting. I came back last night. You didn't call me. There wasn't time. He said it like we were discussing a missed dinner reservation, not the last hours of my husband's life. I'm his wife, I said louder. Why wasn't I called? There were restrictions, ICU protocols. He was deteriorating quickly. I took a step forward. You knew. You knew he was slipping and you didn't call me. The doctors didn't want him overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, I spat the word like it was poison. I've been with him every day. I've bathed him, fed him, read to him while you were on business trips and client dinners. And now I don't even get to say goodbye. His jaw clenched. "It's done," he said softer this time. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shove him out of the way and burst through those doors and shake Richard awake. I wanted to believe this wasn't real, but it was. They were already stripping the bed, already disposing of the charts. My husband was gone, and I hadn't even known he was going. I turned and left before they could see me break. The funeral was held 2 days later. 2, not a week, not 5 days, 2, expedited Eric explained. He didn't want a big fuss. I didn't believe that. Richard hated waste, yes, but he also understood the weight of grief. He believed in ritual. He believed in goodbye. I didn't recognize half the people at the service. Executives in suits, former clients, investors. The front row was filled with stiff bodies and stiffer smiles. Eric delivered a eulogy that sounded more like a resume reading than a remembrance. Richard Whitmore built a legacy, he said. He taught me the value of perseverance and of protecting what matters. I stood at the very back, not out of modesty, because there was nowhere for me to sit. My name wasn't on the guest list. No chair had been reserved. No flowers bore my name. It was like I had been cut out of the frame. Rain started to fall again halfway through the ceremony. No umbrellas, no pause, just quiet droplets sliding off black coats and polished shoes. Eric didn't flinch. The priest rushed the final blessings. And just like that, Richard was lowered into the ground. No one looked at me. No one offered a hand. I stayed long after the others left. Watched the groundskeeper pack away chairs, stared at the casket until it disappeared into mud. Then I walked home, soaked, alone. For the next few days I moved through the house like a ghost. A place I'd once made warm now felt foreign. Pictures were missing from shelves, his toiletries gone from the sink. I checked his closet and found his clothes boxed up. When I asked Eric, he said simply, "I thought it would help." He was scrubbing me out of the story. Every book, every framed photo, every memory I had left of Richard was being sanitized, removed, replaced with an acceptable version of history. A version where I was temporary, a placeholder, a convenience. I opened the drawer of Richard's nightstand and found it empty. Gone was the letter I'd written him on our 10th anniversary. Gone was the Polaroid of us on our first vacation. Gone was the card he kept creased and coffee-stained that said, "I couldn't have done this without you." I wasn't losing a husband. I was being rewritten out of a life. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Friday morning, a stiff cream-colored thing with embossed lettering, from Kent and Associates Attorneys at Law. Inside, a summons to the official reading of Richard's last will and testament. I stood there in the kitchen holding the letter with trembling hands. The envelope felt heavier than it should. It was a formality, I told myself. Just words, legal language. I wasn't interested in the money. I didn't care about properties or stocks or business shares. I just wanted to see my name, to be acknowledged, to be remembered, to matter. But something inside me whispered otherwise. Something told me this wasn't going to be what I expected. I stared out the kitchen window as the rain tapped softly against the glass. There was a storm coming, and I was standing at the eye of it. After the will was read, I didn't go back to the house. There was nothing there for me anymore. No photos, no furniture that hadn't been replaced, no linens with my scent still clinging to them. Even the cat, our old half-blind Tabby, had mysteriously run off, according to Eric. He didn't seem to mind. I packed 2 suitcases in silence, took my mother's tea kettle, and left through the back door. I rented a small room above a closed florist's shop on the outskirts of Sacramento. The kind of place where no one asks your name unless you stop paying rent. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, and the shower water came out rusty for the first 30 seconds every morning. But it had a lock. It had privacy. And more than anything, it had silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your chest and squeezes slowly, like a boa constrictor in slow motion. I stopped answering the phone. At first they rang constantly. Friends, or more accurately, people I had thought were friends. Women from charity boards, from fundraising galas, from long-forgotten bridge games. They left voice messages that started kind and quickly became clinical. "Grace, I was just thinking of you. Do call back when you're free." Then I heard Richard left everything to Eric. That must be complicated. And finally nothing. The silence of realization that I had outlived my usefulness. Without Richard's name, I was just Grace. No title, no standing, no access to the accounts I'd once helped build to the network I'd quietly stitched together. My worth had been so deeply tied to him in their eyes that when he died and didn't take me with him in legacy or in law, I ceased to matter. I stopped going outside except to buy groceries. Even then I wore sunglasses and a scarf like a faded actress avoiding paparazzi that never came. I knew no one would recognize me. That wasn't the point. The disguise was for me to hide the shame, the invisibility, the sickening sense that I had been made irrelevant by the stroke of a pen. Depression doesn't announce itself with drama. It trickles in like rain under a closed window, slow and unnoticed until the floor is soaked. Mine came quietly. Days blurred. I forgot to eat. Or I ate crackers for dinner and told myself that counted. I slept too much or not at all. I began hoarding Richard's old voicemail messages, listening to them on loop, until his voice felt more like a recording than a memory. I avoided mirrors. When I did look, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me looked older, not from time, but from grief. My hair had grayed rapidly, streaks of silver woven through where warm brown used to live. My eyes had gone dull. My skin pale slack from weight I didn't remember losing. There were days I didn't speak a single word, just moved from the bed to the chair and back again like some broken pendulum. Then came the night I decided to let go. It wasn't a suicide note moment, no drama, no final drink. Just a box of papers and the decision to throw it all away. I'd kept everything in a banker's box under the desk, old receipts, medical files from Richard's last months, a copy of our marriage certificate, blurry photos from our trip to Maine. Every remnant of a life I had once believed was shared. I pulled the box onto the floor, stared at it like a stranger. None of it meant anything anymore. The receipts didn't prove love. The certificates didn't guarantee memory. The photos didn't restore dignity. I picked up the first handful papers curled at the edges and carried them to the trash bin. Then came the knock. 3 short taps, sharp, unexpected, unmistakably real. I froze. It was nearly midnight. No one knocked at that hour unless something was wrong. I approached the door slowly, heart-thudding, breath shallow. I looked through the peephole and felt my knees weaken. It was Martha. Martha Grant. She had worked in our home for nearly 2 decades. Not just a housekeeper, she was the one who made Richard ginger tea during flu seasons, the one who gave Eric his first driving lesson behind our backs, the one who knew the combination to our safe before I did. She was supposed to have left town after Richard's death. Eric had told me she moved back to Ohio. I opened the door. She looked older, thinner, her gray curls tucked under a knitted hat, but her eyes were still steady. "Grace," she said softly. I didn't speak. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, gently closed the door behind her, and took a deep breath. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, "but I needed to see you, now." I nodded, gestured toward the chair. She didn't sit. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch, faded red fraying at the seams. She held it in both hands like it was sacred. "He told me to give you this," she whispered. "Who?" She didn't answer, just handed me the pouch. I opened it. Inside was a USB drive, black, unmarked, ordinary to the unknowing eye. My fingers closed around it slowly, carefully, as if it might vanish. "I don't understand," I said. Martha's voice lowered. "Richard gave it to me 2 weeks before he died. Said if anything happened, and if certain things didn't go the way he hoped, I was to bring it to you, but only when you were alone, only when you were ready." My throat tightened. "Did he say what was on it?" She hesitated. "He said it was his truth, and that you'd know what to do with it." I sat down, the USB still in my hand. I looked up at her. "Why didn't you bring it sooner?" "Because Eric made me sign a non-disclosure. Said it was about estate integrity." Her lip curled. "He fired me 2 days after the funeral." Of course he did. He'd wanted her out before she could become a threat. "I waited," Martha continued. "Watched the obituaries, the gossip sites, saw your name disappearing from everything, and I knew then that wasn't Richard's choice." Tears welled in my eyes, not because of the betrayal, because for the first time in months someone believed me. Someone saw me. "Why did you keep it?" I whispered. "Why not give it to Eric?" She gave me a long, steady look. "Because I remember who stayed in the hospital every night, who made soup from scratch, who cried in the laundry room when no one was watching. Silence passed between us, heavy but not cold. I stood, walked over, hugged her. It was the first time in weeks I had touched another human being. When she pulled back, she smiled sadly. I don't know what's on that drive, Grace, but whatever it is, he trusted you with it. That means something. After she left, I sat in the dark, USB in one hand, box of memories in the other. I didn't sleep. I just waited for morning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something to wake up for. The morning after Martha brought the USB, I didn't make tea. I didn't wash my face. I didn't even open the curtains. I sat at the edge of the bed with the drive in my hand, feeling its tiny weight press into my skin like a confession waiting to be heard. It was strange the way hope felt foreign now. It trembled inside me, not as a surge of joy, but as dread. Like something sacred and dangerous had finally arrived. Like I was standing on a cliff with my arms open, waiting to see if I would fall or fly. I pulled out my old laptop from the closet, dusty, cracked near the hinge, a decade out of date, but still functional. I plugged in the drive. My hands were cold, my breath shallow. The folder opened. One file. To Grace, watch this first. The name alone was enough to make my throat tighten. I clicked. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered to life. The footage was grainy, like it had been filmed on a cheap handheld camera. The frame wobbled before settling, and then there he was. Richard, my Richard, sitting in his brown leather armchair in the study, the one we used to call the thinking chair. He was thinner, paler, and you could tell he was in pain. His breath was labored. His skin sagged around his cheeks. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, steady, clear. He looked straight into the lens and said my name. Grace. My heart cracked. If you're watching this, he continued, then I've failed. I'm gone. And I couldn't protect you. He paused to cough, a deep guttural sound that came from somewhere broken inside him. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, then forced a faint smile. I've made mistakes, a lot of them. But the worst would be leaving you unguarded. I stared at the screen, frozen. This wasn't just a message. This was a man reaching back from beyond a grave someone else had tried to bury me in. He leaned forward. You need to know the truth. You need to hear it from me. No filter, no lawyer, no Eric. The camera shifted slightly as he adjusted, grimacing. I know what he's done, he said. I know what he's planning, and I know I've let him get too close. I blinked, my pulse in my throat. Eric started managing my medication about 3 months ago. Said it would help you rest. Said you needed a break. He laughed bitterly, coughed again. He changed the labels. I didn't notice at first, but I knew something was wrong. I was more confused than usual, drowsy at strange hours. Then I started hiding the pills, and I felt better. I covered my mouth. I tested them, he continued. I took one of each to an old friend who still works at the lab. The dosage had been altered. He was dulling me, making me easier to guide. My body went still. Grace, he said, voice firmer now. Eric's been plotting this for months. He's convinced I've lost capacity. He's manipulated my doctors, my lawyer. He thinks he can make it look legal. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I wrote a new will, the real one, with instructions notarized and filed with an independent firm. You'll find it behind the false panel in the study bottom drawer of the old record cabinet. The passcode is our anniversary, the one you carved into the stone at Lover's Point. I remembered it instantly. March 17th, 1993, still etched on that rock by the cliffs where he first told me he loved me. I'm leaving everything to you, he said plainly, because it was always yours anyway. The business, the house, the savings. You built it with me. Eric thinks blood gives him a birthright, but he never understood what it takes to build something from nothing. I sobbed into my palms. I'm sorry, he whispered, for the silences, for the times I didn't speak up, for letting him get between us. He looked away as if collecting himself. And if he tries to challenge this, you show them this. You show them this video, and you take back what's yours. He looked back into the camera, eyes wet but unwavering. I love you, Grace. I always have. I always will. The video ended, just like that. But I stayed frozen for a long time, staring at the black screen, hearing my name and his voice on loop in my head. He had seen. He had known. He had believed me even when he didn't say it out loud. even when he let Eric have the louder voice. Even when I thought I was standing alone, Richard had been watching, recording, documenting, protecting me in the only way he had left. And suddenly the dam inside me broke. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing, gut-wrenching, body-twisting sobs that had waited months to come out. I cried for the betrayal, yes. But more than that, I cried for the man who loved me enough to fight for me from beyond the grave. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't crazy. Richard had seen me, and that changed everything. It wasn't just a video. It was proof. Proof of the conspiracy. Proof of Eric's manipulation. Proof that I mattered. That I had mattered all along. I pressed my forehead to the hardwood floor, still holding the USB in one hand, clutching it like a lifeline. The storm inside me, months of quiet despair, of being erased, of doubting my own memories, finally had something solid to cling to. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something deeper than grief. I felt power, real, untouchable, righteous power. This was no longer just my pain. It was my evidence, and I knew what I had to do. It took me 2 full days to build up the courage to leave that room. Not because I was afraid of the world outside, but because for the first time in months, I had something to lose. The USB sat wrapped in a silk scarf inside my purse like a relic, fragile, vital, holy. I double-checked it at every red light as if it might vanish, as if somehow someone would know I had it and come to take it away. The first stop was the district police station, not the neighborhood precinct. No, this called for something more official. I stepped into that fluorescent-lit lobby with a spine made of steel and hands shaking like paper. A young officer approached me, polite but distracted, asking if I needed help. "Yes," I said louder than I meant to. "I'm here to report a fraudulent will medication tampering and possibly attempted murder." That got his attention. I handed over a typed summary 3 pages long with itemized evidence, medical anomalies, and timelines. On top the USB. "There's a video," I told him, "from my late husband. He names the person responsible." They led me to a small interview room. The air was stale. The table wobbled. But I sat straight. I didn't blink. I was done being erased. Within an hour, I was speaking to a senior investigator, a woman named Lieutenant Perez, early 40s, sharp eyes. She listened without interruption, only pausing once to ask, "Do you have anyone else who can corroborate the medical inconsistencies?" I nodded. "My nephew. He works in the district attorney's office. His name is Michael Tran." She arched an eyebrow. "That'll help." And it did. Michael met me the next morning. He looked both shocked and vindicated. "Aunt Grace," he whispered after watching the video, "why didn't you come to me sooner? Because until now I said I didn't know I had a voice worth listening to." With Michael's guidance, the investigation accelerated. They reopened Richard's medical files, pulled pharmacy records, subpoenaed private care journals. What they found made my stomach twist. Over the final 3 months of Richard's life, his prescriptions had changed drastically. Doses had doubled in places they shouldn't. One compound, a rarely used sedative, showed up repeatedly on days I wasn't home. And worse, a beta blocker had been replaced with a similar-looking pill, known for slowly degrading heart function in elderly patients. It didn't kill him outright, but it made sure the clock ticked faster. "He wouldn't have lived forever," Michael said gently. "But what Eric did, it was calculated. He wanted your husband compliant, weak, and eventually gone. And the case went from suspicious to criminal in less than a week. They called it malicious manipulation of medical treatment with financial intent. I called it betrayal. And I wasn't done. I hired an attorney of my own, a woman named Dana Caldwell. She was in her 60s, wore her gray hair like armor, and greeted me with a firm handshake and an even firmer promise we're going to blow the doors off this. She filed motions to have the fraudulent will suspended and the valid one reinstated, based on Richard's testimony in the video, the recovered original documents from the cabinet in the study, and the forensic analysis that confirmed his signature and state of mind. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. Eric was served at his office. I heard he didn't take it well. He'd spent the last few months posing as the grieving son inheritor of an empire, a respectable CEO. He wasn't expecting the widow he thought he'd silenced to come back swinging. The hearing took place in a small courtroom downtown. No cameras, no press, but the tension in that room electric. Eric sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit 2 sizes too tight, whether from muscle or ego I couldn't say. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear as Dana laid out the timeline, the medications, the sealed files, and the final blow, the video. The judge didn't allow it to play in open court, not yet, but she acknowledged its existence on record. Eric didn't look at me once. I, however, never looked away. When they gave me a chance to speak, I stood. Not with fire, not with fury, but with clarity. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I asked one question. Eric. I said, my voice calm but cutting. Do you remember when you were 7 years old and you had that terrible fever? He blinked. You were burning up, I continued. Your mother was gone. Your father was working overnight. I stayed with you in your room all night. I made rice porridge. I put cold cloths on your forehead. Do you remember? He said nothing. I do, I said, because love remembers. The room was silent. Even the judge didn't speak. Eric's jaw clenched, his lips parted, but he still didn't answer. That was enough for me. Not because I needed him to admit guilt. Not that day. Not there, but because I wanted the court to hear what he'd forgotten, that I had been family, that I had been there, and that what he stole wasn't just money or control. It was memory. It was history. It was mine. When the judge called for a recess, I walked past him slowly. He didn't meet my eyes, but I saw the flush on his cheeks, the way his hands fidgeted, the way his lawyer stared at him like a ticking bomb. That's when I knew. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid of the truth, because no amount of estate planning or manipulated documents could cover up the one thing he hadn't counted on. Me. I had come back, and this time I wasn't asking to be included. I was taking back everything that had been stolen, piece by piece, word by word. Starting with my name, there's a sound the truth makes when it finally breaks through lies. It's not a bang, not a thunderclap. It's quiet, like the crack of ice just before it splits, barely audible, but once it starts, nothing can stop it from tearing everything open. For Eric, that sound came on the 4th day of hearings. It was a Thursday morning, sky overcast, courtroom packed. The judge's bench was flanked by 2 flags and one tired bailiff who'd clearly seen too many broken families trying to pretend their battles were just legal matters. But no one in that room was prepared for what Dana Caldwell did next. She called Eric's former lawyer to the stand, Mr. Harold Lansing, silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of smugness only found in men who think their secrets are safer than they are. Dana didn't attack him. She didn't need to. She laid out the paper trail, first bank records, wire transfers, and 2 very suspicious payments, labeled as consulting fees, that aligned perfectly with the week Richard's last forged will was signed. Mr. Lansing tried to play it off. I was paid for estate planning assistance, he said. Estate planning, for whom Dana asked, her voice calm as glass. Well, for Mr. Whitmore, of course. Then why, she said, stepping forward. Do we have a time-stamped video of Mr. Whitmore filmed 5 days after the date on that will stating he never authorized a revision, was being medicated without consent, and feared for his wife's safety? Lansing blinked. Dana pulled a document from her folder and handed it to the judge. This is a signed affidavit from the notary public assigned to witness the supposed new will. In it, the notary states that the client was groggy, disoriented, and could not answer simple questions about the document being signed. The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Lansing, Dana said, were you aware that Mr. Whitmore was under the influence of unprescribed sedatives when he signed the will? He said nothing. She walked over, lowered her voice. Did you knowingly witness the invalidation of a legal testament in exchange for a financial payout? Lansing swallowed. And then he broke. I didn't know the full extent, he muttered. Eric told me it was just a clarification. He said the old will was outdated, that Mr. Whitmore had changed his mind. And you didn't verify this with Mr. Whitmore yourself. I tried, he said, but it was clear he wasn't fully aware. Yet you let the signing go through. A pause. Yes. The judge's gavel hit the block once firm, final. Let the record show, she said, that the court accepts the testimony of Mr. Lansing and acknowledges potential misconduct surrounding the execution of the revised will. It was over, at least the first part. What followed was rapid, clinical, and almost surreal. The court formally admitted the USB video into evidence along with 2 supplemental audio files recovered from the laptop. Richard's voice shaky but lucid, documenting Eric's behavior in his final days. It was like watching a puzzle snap into place, every ugly piece made visible. But the final blow came from the coroner's office. Dana had pushed for a supplementary forensic review of Richard's tissue samples. The lab confirmed the presence of metoprolol in doses far exceeding prescription, compounded with a secondary agent that over time would degrade cardiac function without triggering red flags. Intentional poisoning, the judge asked. Cumulative incapacitation with foreseeable consequence, the pathologist replied. Call it what you want. But yes, it contributed to his death. They didn't need to say more. The arrest warrant was issued that same afternoon. Eric was led out of the courtroom in cuffs. He didn't fight, didn't protest, didn't even ask for a delay. He just stared ahead, jaw-clenched, hands shaking. As the bailiff read him his rights, he turned slightly toward me. Not defiant, not apologetic, just raw. I just wanted to take back what was mine, he said. Not an apology, a justification, as if inheritance was a war and I had been the occupying force. I looked him in the eye. You wanted what you didn't earn, I said quietly. That's not justice. That's theft. He didn't reply. He just looked down as they walked him out. The doors closed behind him and the courtroom exhaled. But the world outside, it had only just begun to notice. By the time I stepped onto the courthouse steps, reporters were already waiting. Microphones, flashbulbs, questions shouted over each other. Mrs. Whitmore, is it true your husband left everything to you? Did Eric Whitmore really alter your husband's medication? How do you feel now that the will has been overturned? I didn't say much. Just one line. I came to court as a widow. I'm leaving as a woman with her name restored. It was enough. Within hours, the media had a headline. The erased wife who fought back. The story exploded. Social media lit up. Hashtags trended. News anchors debated ethics. People sent messages from all over the country. Women who had been pushed out of families. Men who had watched stepchildren rewrite their legacies. Caregivers who had been cast aside when their work was done. I didn't ask for it, but suddenly I had become a symbol. The woman who had been written out and wrote herself back in. A viral video of me walking out of the courtroom aired on a dozen networks, shoulders back. Eyes dry, spine unshaken. People called it the quiet power of dignity. For the first time since Richard died, I felt the world turn toward me, not as a widow, not as an accessory, but as a force. Still, I didn't revel in it. This wasn't victory. Not yet. Justice, after all, is never clean. It doesn't replace what was taken. It doesn't hug you at night or call your name in the dark. It doesn't heal betrayal. But it's a start. And after all I'd lost, that was more than enough. The courtroom was packed on the day the ruling was announced. There was no gavel bang or dramatic gasp, no sweeping music like in the movies. Just a judge with weary eyes and a voice like gravel reading words that shifted the air around me. The court finds that the revised will submitted by Eric Whitmore is invalid due to evidence of coercion and medical incapacitation of the deceased. The original will, dated March 17th, remains the lawful testament of Richard Whitmore. She looked directly at me. The sole beneficiary is Grace Whitmore. The room went silent. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just inhaled slowly like someone tasting oxygen for the first time in months. Dana squeezed my hand gently, but I didn't need reassurance. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was finally visible, legally, officially, irrefutably. But what struck me wasn't the number of zeros attached to the inheritance. It wasn't the property titles or the business shares or the life insurance policies that now bore my name. It was the knowledge that a system designed to forget me had been forced to remember. I walked out of that building not as the erased widow, but as the woman my husband had loved and trusted enough to leave everything to. Still, there was a weight that clung to my shoulders, because power, when you've lived without it for so long, doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a question. What do you do with it? 3 days later, I answered. I held a press conference, not in some marble atrium or hotel ballroom, but in the garden of the nonprofit women's shelter I had quietly supported for years, one of the only places that had reached out to me when I was at my lowest. The air was brisk, cameras clicked, reporters shuffled their notes waiting for something salacious. Instead, I gave them this. I was given a fortune, I said, standing behind a simple podium, but what I needed most when my life fell apart. wasn't money. It was dignity, a place to belong, a second chance. I paused, looked out at the women seated in folding chairs, some with children on their laps, some with hands clasped tightly in their coats. There are women across this country who've been erased in quieter ways than I was, by husbands, by systems, by families. They've been made to feel like afterthoughts, like burdens, like ghosts in their own lives. I held up a simple folder, in memory of my husband, and for every woman who's ever been told she doesn't matter, I'm donating the entirety of my inheritance to launch the Seed Widow Foundation. A murmur ran through the crowd. It will provide housing, legal aid, mental health care, and seed capital for widows and abandoned women seeking to rebuild their lives. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The fire in my chest did all the speaking. This isn't charity, I finished. This is correction, restoration. This is making the invisible seen. The story broke faster than I expected. Front pages, nightly news, trending hashtags. She fought back. Seed Widow. People began sharing their stories. Messages flooded in from everywhere, letters from women who had spent decades in the shadows clinging to hope they thought was long gone. I became something I never asked to be, a symbol. But behind every symbol is still a person, and that person was tired. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I packed a single suitcase, sent my cell phone into a drawer, and boarded a bus heading north. I didn't tell the press, didn't alert the foundation board. I left a letter with Dana. Please don't call unless the world is ending, and even then, knock first. I got off the bus in a little mountain town called Carmel Ridge, a town known more for its pines than its people. The air was thin, the sky wider than I remembered skies being. I found a small house at the edge of a hill, modest, sun-worn, with a porch that creaked and floors that didn't care how soft you walked. I paid the first year in full, no negotiation. The landlord asked if I was running from something. I said no, I'm running to myself. I furnished the place slowly. 1 chair, 1 teapot, 1 painting of a harbor I'd never visited but felt like home. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's memory. I wasn't performing for anyone's comfort. I was just being. The trial ended exactly 1 month after the judge's ruling. Eric was sentenced to 18 years. Intent to defraud, aggravated medical abuse, and attempted inheritance manipulation, the headlines read. His face was plastered everywhere. Mine too. But I didn't look. I didn't need to watch him fall. I'd already risen. Some people called me brave. Some called me vengeful. They missed the point. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I had lost everything, my home, my name, my place in the world, and still found my way back to myself. Not through fury, not through noise, through truth, through memory, through choice, the choice to not become what they made me feel like. And now in this quiet mountain town, I was learning how to begin again, not with noise, with stillness, with sunlight on the porch, and the kind of peace you only get after the storm has passed. I opened the doors to the tea room on a Tuesday morning. No ribbon cutting, no flyers, no grand opening posted to social media. Just a handwritten sign in the window, March, herbal teas and stories. Come in, sit, breathe. The name had come to me in a dream, not because March was the beginning of spring or a metaphor for new life, but because it was the month Richard died, and also the month I finally began living. I chose to honor both. The space was small, 2 rooms, and a garden out back. Walls the color of dried lavender. Shelves filled with glass jars, each labeled in my own handwriting: lemon balm, hibiscus, wild mint, passion flower. A kettle, always warm steam curling into sunlight that spilled across the hardwood. It smelled like memory in there, not of grief, but of healing, of mornings reclaimed, of soft silences finally earned. I had 4 tables inside, 2 outside, and no Wi-Fi. A small chalkboard read, "Ask me about the stories. They're always steeped fresh." That was the rule of the tea room. For every cup served, a story was offered. Not mine, at least, not at first. The stories belonged to the people who walked in. Strangers, wanderers, women who had carried too much for too long, men who didn't know how to ask for peace, but sat anyway, grateful for a chair and a cup. They told me things, not all at once, not in dramatic confessions, but in soft, sideways disclosures. A woman with cracked hands murmured about the daughter who hadn't called in 7 years. A man asked if chamomile helped with guilt. A boy sat outside for 3 days straight before finally saying his mother had passed in her sleep and no one had taught him how to live without her. I didn't fix them. I poured tea. I listened. And sometimes I told them something small back, a memory, a moment, a fragment of myself I could give without bleeding. People started coming back. Not because the tea was extraordinary, though I like to think it was, but because March was a place where no one had to be strong to be seen. And one morning she walked in, a girl no more than 21. Thin arms, worn shoes, a backpack that looked heavier than her entire frame. She stood in the doorway for a long time before sitting down. I brought her a mug of tulsi and rose. She cupped it like she hadn't touched warmth in weeks. She didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then she looked up. "I know who you are," she said quietly. I didn't react. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The paper trembled in her fingers. "I got this last year," she said, "from the Seed Widow Foundation." I sat across from her. "I was awarded the Clara Lee Scholarship," she said. "Full ride, 4 years, biochemistry. I start at UC Davis in the fall." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm going to be a pharmacist. Someday I want to open a clinic for women like my mom." I smiled. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "I didn't even know who started the foundation until I saw your name on the newsletter." "You just did," I said softly. She looked around the room. "Why open a tea shop after all that you could be anywhere?" I thought about the articles, the magazine interviews, the board seats I was offered and declined. I thought about the world asking me to become a brand, a spokeswoman, a survivor in lipstick. I needed a space that wasn't built on pain, I said. I wanted to create something simple, quiet, something I could touch with both hands and know it was mine. She nodded. We sat in silent, steam rising between us. And then she reached across the table. "Can I hug you?" I let her. And for the first time in years, I felt joy without the ache of proving anything. That night after I closed the shop and wiped down the counters, I stood at the garden gate and looked out at the pines. There were no crowds, no applause, just stars and wind and the soft creak of the sign above the door. For the first time since Richard's death, I didn't feel defined by it, not by what I lost, not by what I fought for, not by what I gave away, just by who I was, Grace, a woman who served tea and stories in a quiet mountain town. And that finally was enough. Grace sat at the writing desk by the window, a cup of lotus tea cooling beside her. The afternoon light filtered in soft and golden, casting lace-like shadows from the old balcony railings onto the wooden floor. On her lap was a single sheet of paper, heavy cream-colored, the kind you kept for moments that deserved to last. Her pen hovered for a moment, then slowly she began to write. "Dear me, you are 30 years old today. The world thinks you are lucky. You married a man with promise, a man everyone admires. You've just sold the house your parents left you to help him launch a business. You believe in him more than you believe in yourself. Let me tell you what they won't believe in someone else should never cost you your own reflection. You think love means shrinking, folding, compromising. You smile at parties when they ignore you, laugh politely when they interrupt. You accept the shadows because you've been told that's where loyalty lives. It doesn't. One day you will wake up and find your name missing from the very life you helped build. They will say you were never there. They will tell a version of the story where you are a footnote, an inconvenience, an echo. Don't believe them. You were the architect of every foundation. You were the reason the light stayed on the books, balanced the fever broke. You were there in every silence that no one thanked you for. And one day you will lose everything. But then you will find something greater yourself. And oh, how beautiful she is. Don't you ever shrink again. Don't you ever make yourself small to fit inside someone else's dream. You deserve a life with your name written all over it. Love me." Grace folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box carved with cherry blossoms. She tucked it beside a photo of herself at 30, eyes full of hope, wearing a borrowed dress, standing next to Richard at their first warehouse opening. She looked at that young woman now, not with pity, but with reverence, because she had survived and because she had risen. Outside, the wind carried a familiar melody. Grace stepped onto the balcony and turned up the old speaker, playing softly behind her. It was Trin Kong's son, She didn't know Vietnamese, not really, but she knew what longing sounded like. She knew what quiet courage felt like in the bones. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and took a sip of the tea. It tasted like peace. From this high above the town, she could see the street curve along the hills, the old pine trees bending in the breeze. Somewhere below, a young girl was receiving her scholarship notice. A woman was opening a letter from the Seed Widow Foundation. A lawyer was filing papers to finalize the transfer of assets for someone who had no idea she still had value. Ripples, that's what healing was. Not a flood, not a revolution. Just small waves moving outward, reshaping the world one edge at a time. Grace sat back and let the sun warm her cheeks. And then softly she spoke. Not to anyone beside her, but to the space she now occupied fully. If you, she said, have ever been erased from your own story, she paused, letting the wind carry her voice. Just know you still get to write the next chapter. Her voice was calm, steady. It's yours. And with that, Grace closed her eyes and let herself rest in her own name, her own skin, her own life.